one of the most feared Irish criminals in the city of Boston's dark history. What's up, everybody? Welcome back. Today we're going to talk about one of the most feared men in the Boston underworld's history, Stephen, aka Little Stevie Hughes. Stevie made one half of the lethal Hughes brothers along with his brother Cornelius, aka Connie Hughes. The Hughes were part of the McLaughlin crew out of Charlestown. Before the conflict in the 1960s, the Charlestown crew were already hardened criminals and well known in the underworld. It was rumored that they were employed to break labor strikes and even given contracts by the New York mob. Every man in this crew was feared, but the Hughes brothers were on a different level. Punchy and Bernie McLaughlin were basically in charge of the crew, but the Hughes brothers were the most feared members. Even though Cornelius looks much more like a thug compared to his brother Stevie, Stevie was always considered to be the more lethal of the two. Like the majority of the McLaughlin crew, on paper Stevie Hughes was a longshoreman on the Charlestown waterfront, but I don't think he did much manual labor on the docks. Like most thugs, it was just a front. Stevie Hughes was basically always just a leg breaker. They were down there to ply their loan sharking trade, steal cargo, and keep the workers in line. Stevie Hughes' first caller came as an adult in April of 1948 for driving a stolen motor vehicle. A few months after that, in August, he and Bernie McLaughlin waited outside of a bar in South Boston to mug someone. The target was a man named John Wentzler, who was a lawyer and a politician. He also had a reputation for resisting thieves. As soon as he came out of the bar, Bernie and Stevie demanded he give up his money. When he resisted, they began to pummel him. As this was happening, Wentzler screamed for help, and a patrolman walking his beat heard the lawyer's cries for help. He told the two young men to freeze. When they tried to flee, the officer took out his service weapon and hit Bernie in the stomach. He survived, but they both ended up getting arrested. This shows how long the McLaughlins and the Hughes have been connected to each other criminally. Stevie's brother Connie took his first caller with a young George McLaughlin during a failed robbery in the 1940s as well. These two families had been committing crimes together for decades before the beef with Somerville popped off. These guys were certified criminals way before the conflict, unlike Winter Hill, which was mostly blue-collar working stiffs before the conflict. A year or so after the failed mugging, Stevie Hughes was arrested again in 1949. Once again, Hughes was arrested in a stolen motor vehicle with possession of a weapon. In his company was an older convict named Frederick Zaboli. Zaboli was more than 20 years older than Hughes. Apparently, he was also in possession of a weapon and some narcotics. I never heard that any of the Charlestown guys were users. They definitely were very heavy drinkers, though. It was pretty obvious by the company young Stevie Hughes was keeping that he had chosen a life of crime. After this, Stevie went to prison for a little bit. In the can, he slimmed down and became more muscular. He also boxed regularly. He developed a reputation as someone who was good with his hands, and people respected the way he carried himself. Also, while he was locked up, he befriended the powerful LCN enforcer from Boston's South End, Larry Bayonne, aka Ilario Zanino. Before the conflict erupted in the 1960s, the Charlestown guys had a good relationship with the Italians. They had no problems with the North End, they did business with Raymond Patriarca, and like I said previously, it's even been rumored that they handled labor disputes all over the country for the New York Commission. Stevie Hughes would stay out of trouble for a while until 1959 when he was arrested for attempting to take the life of another Charlestown man. Francis Ahern, who worked down on the waterfront, was a friend of the deceased Tommy Sullivan, was apparently telling people he was going to say something about the crime that happened 2 years prior. I made a video about Tommy Sullivan back in the fall. Basically, he was a longshoreman in South Boston, and he was sick and tired of seeing the criminals bully and extort the workers, so he stood up to them. He ended up giving Punchy McLaughlin an epic beatdown, but later paid the price for it. Now Ahern was talking openly about the crime and making too much noise, so he had to go. Stevie Hughes caught Ahern on July 17, 1959 on Columbus Avenue in Roxbury and hit him twice in the head. Unbelievably, Ahern survived the attack. Stevie fled the city, only to return a year later in 1960. His lawyer had worked out a plea deal while Hughes was on the lam. He pled guilty and received a 5-year sentence upstate. So on the eve of the Charlestown-Somerville conflict, one of the town's best hitters was in prison. During his bids, Stevie befriended Joe the Animal Barbosa. Apparently, Barbosa liked Hughes' fighting style in the ring, among other things. While Stevie Hughes was doing his bid, the Boston streets exploded. While he was away, Georgie McLaughlin caught an epic beatdown. His brother Bernie asked Buddy McLean to turn over the men who were responsible. When he refused, the Charlestown crew tried to rig a bomb underneath his family car. The next day, on Halloween 1961, Buddy took out Bernie McLaughlin in Charlestown Square at high noon. I'm sure Stevie Hughes was probably going out of his mind being sidelines during the beginning of this hostilities. At first, Charlestown probably seemed like the favorites. They were already established criminals, but throughout the conflict, more groups kept getting involved. Groups like Wimpy Bennett's Roxbury crew were originally on Charlestown's side, but then they switched it up and tipped the scale in Somerville's favor. While Stevie was locked up, Bernie got whacked, an attempt had been made on Punchy's life, Georgie was on the lam for a body, but even with the casualties inflicted on Charlestown and their allies switching sides, the Boston underworld held its breath when Stevie Hughes came out of prison. Even in the McLaughlins' weakened state, no one on the opposition side was safe, with the Hughes brothers out there lurking in the shadows. By the time Stevie Hughes got out of prison, the whole city was basically hunting the Charlestown guys. No one could make money while this conflict was ongoing. Ray and Patriarca and the Italian LCN got involved at this point. He was sick of losing money. With Bernie dead, Georgie on trial, about to be sentenced to life, and Punchy being hunted like an animal, Charlestown was definitely on the ropes. Finally, on their third try, the allies of Somerville caught Punchy at a bus stop in West Roxbury and finished the job. He was taking a bus to see Georgie's trial every day. He lost his hand in the second attempt on his life, so he couldn't drive anymore. And that was on October 20th, 1965, and it was a big loss for Charlestown. The celebration was very short-lived on the hill, though. Less than 2 weeks later, on Halloween 1965, 4 years to the day that Buddy McLean killed Bernie McLaughlin, Stevie Hughes caught him on his own turf. Apparently, Stevie Fleming had warned Buddy about this a few weeks prior to his death. He noticed Buddy was drinking heavier and heavier, and he was vulnerable coming out of these bars at night loaded. But Buddy thought he was untouchable in Somerville. No one would dare come into his territory and try to take him out there. This is one of the most epic hits in the Boston Underworld's history, not just because it was Buddy McLean, the king of Winter Hill, who died, but also because the man who executed the attack seemed to have some kind of superhuman abilities. As Buddy McLean, Rico Sacramone, and Tony Blue Agostino left the Winter Hill Lounge on Broadway a little after 1 a.m., a shadowy figure watched them approach the car. Unbeknownst to the three men, Stevie Hughes was lying in wait in the lobby of the closed Capitol Theater. While covered in darkness, Hughes watched their every move. As soon as they came into striking distance, the assailant jumped out of the shadows, running towards them. In a single motion, he hit McLean and Sacramone in the head while in a full sprint. He then turned to Agostino, who was shielded on the other side of the vehicle, but still Hughes managed to hit him as well. The attack happened in a split second. None of the men even drew out their weapons. As the policeman walking his beat heard the noise, he came running to the scene. But just as fast as he carried out the attack, Hughes fled out through the back of the abandoned theater, losing his mask and weapon as he jumped over rubble. After a couple fences, he disappeared into thin air. This was a huge loss for Somerville. Buddy was the leader of the crew, but beyond that, he was loved in the city. He was like a local folklore hero there. Even though it was inevitable that Charlestown was going to lose, everyone had to stay alert while the Hughes brothers were out there. They weren't hiding like Punchy either. They were actively out there hunting for their opposition. Because of his successful mission against Buddy, Stevie Hughes had gotten the attention of Joe Barbosa and his East Boston crew. Barbosa loved McLean, and he went berserk when he heard that he got whacked. He vowed not to stop until the Hughes and anyone else involved were dead. The Hughes brothers laid low for a little bit after McLean's death, but then in March of 1966, a strange incident occurred. Both of the brothers had been drinking heavily at a friend's house in Revere when they returned back to Connie's house in Malden. Some sort of confusion happened where they thought someone was there to attack them. Connie was heard saying, "I'll get you," and after a couple blasts, Stevie's voice was saying, "Stop yelling, it's me, Stevie!" In the confusion, Connie hit his brother 5 times in the stomach. There are also rumors that Stevie was having an affair with his brother's wife, and this could be why this all took place. Stevie Hughes recovered quickly from his wounds and went back out on the hunt. He joined up with another one of the last McLaughlin crew members out there, Spike O'Toole. Spike was a Dorchester native from the Savin Hill neighborhood, and he previously had been best friends with George McLaughlin before he was incarcerated. He was also incredibly feared on the streets. He was involved in an ongoing beef with Jimmy the Bear Fleming. On May 3rd, 1966, earlier in the day, the Bear got into an argument on the phone with Spike at his brother Stevie Fleming's Dudley Street store. Stevie Fleming warned his brother that these guys were hunting him, and he needed to switch up his routine. The Bear went home every night at the same time for dinner, and this was where his brother said he was the most vulnerable. After eating dinner at his Adams Street apartment in Dorchester, the Bear left his apartment around 10 p.m. As he walked down the walkway, 2 men came from either side of the building and ambushed him. He was hit 9 times and dropped as the masked men fled. Luckily for the bear, a doctor lived nearby and administered first aid and kept him alive until he was transported to the hospital. He survived the attack, but he was a complete mess afterward. Now Barbosa was insane. Not only had Stevie Hughes whacked Buddy McLean, but he and Spike O'Toole tried to take out his beloved bear. The animal and the bear had been best buds since they met in Walpole in the 1950s. Now he and his crew were out on the hunt. They tracked Connie Hughes to the North Shore Mall in Peabody where he cashed his monthly veterans check. As he pulled off onto an exit off the highway after realizing he was being followed, Barbosa's man Chico Amico blew out his back window but missed him. Then they hunted him down to a Chelsea barroom. As a car full of Barbosa crew members pulled up on Connie's car to fire, his brother Stevie popped up from the back seat, blasting at Barbosa's car before Connie sped away down on a side street. Barbosa's weapon jammed and he couldn't return a volley. He looked down and noticed he had come inches from being struck in the side. Connie's days were numbered though, and a few weeks later on May 25th, a Winter Hill associate spotted Connie drinking at the Stork Club in Charlestown. As Connie left, a car trailed him as he drove onto the Mystic River Bridge. The car pulled up alongside of him. Most likely, it was Joe McDonald who took out Connie Hughes once and for all. Now with his brother gone, Stevie must have been really feeling the heat. He tried to parlay peace talks, but it was too late for that. People just wanted to see him gone. It's rumored that even though the Italians had officially sided with Winter Hill, Stevie Hughes' old prison buddy Larry Bayonne was still rooting for him and even possibly assisting him financially. While looking for other ways to make income, Stevie Hughes began to be a driver and a bodyguard to an old-school German-Jewish criminal named Samuel Lindenbaum, or he was known in the underworld as Sammy Linden. Sammy was a former boxer and he had been operating in the underworld for decades. He shylocked, but his main hustle was his own form of the numbers racket. He sold what he called treasury tickets. It was a form of the lottery, and the winning numbers were the last three numbers on the daily treasury balance that was in the newspapers. It was an incredibly lucrative racket, and Sammy Linden made a lot of money off of it. He also had an untapped resource in the old industrial cities of the Merrimack Valley like Lawrence and Haverhill. Because Sammy Linden was handling such large amounts of money, he wanted some muscle with him. Stevie Hughes was definitely one of the most capable guys in Boston during this time period, but a guy with a giant target on his back isn't someone I'd want protecting me. The Hill and his associates realized that the best time to get Hughes would be when he was making the weekly rounds with Linden. The only problem is the old criminal might get caught in the crossfire, and he had connections to Patriarca. So Wimpy Bennett and other Hill allies brought the problem to Don Raymond for a ruling. Patriarca said he had already warned Linden from being seen in public with Hughes multiple times already. He said if the man's foolish enough to keep being in Hughes' presence, then he basically had it coming. I've also read that directly after this conversation, Patriarca contacted Sammy Linden and asked him to borrow $75,000, knowing full well that he would never have to pay the money back. Unfortunately for Sammy Linden, his fate had been sealed. In order to get the drop on him, they wanted to find out exactly when they were planning on making their rounds. Apparently, Wimpy Bennett possessed equipment that could tap into people's phone lines. It's basically the same equipment law enforcement in the time period were using. They probably bought it off a crooked cop. Frank Salemi, a member of Wimpy's crew and an electrician by trade, climbed up a telephone pole near Linden's house and hooked up a line and tapped it into Sammy's home line. Now the crew could listen to his phone calls from a safe distance. Linden felt very safe on his phone and discussed business openly. They got the exact date and time of when Stevie planned on picking him up for their weekly rounds. Now they could track him from the moment he left his house. On Friday, September 23rd, 1966, on a very warm afternoon, Sammy and Stevie Hughes finished up their collections in the gritty Merrimack Valley cities of Lawrence and Haverhill. The two men stopped as they always did at a seafood restaurant in Bradford, Mass, right outside of Haverhill. Little did Sammy know that those fried clams and lobster rolls would be his last meal. Honestly, not a bad last meal. On their way back to Boston from Lawrence, traveling eastbound on 114, a black sedan came up from behind them. The quiet air in the rural town of Middleton, Mass. Soon exploded as Linden and Hughes got peppered by assailants in the other car. The car driven by Hughes careened off the side of the road, crashing into a ditch as the attack car sped off down 114. Sammy Linden had been the unfortunate casualty of war. He should have definitely, in retrospect, chose a different bodyguard. Stevie Hughes, one of the most feared men in Boston's history, lay dead behind the wheel. Linden's two small dogs were unhurt and were playing in a field next to the car when police first responded. They apparently jumped out of an open window. The attack car was ditched in Danvers at the Liberty Tree Mall parking lot. Frank Salemi and Steve Flemmi would go back later and remove the weapons from the car and wipe it down. The death of Stevie Hughes effectively ended the hostilities between Somerville and Charlestown. Spike O'Toole, the only member of the McLaughlins still alive, managed to stay that way until 1974. This was most likely because he was always in prison. But in 1974, he strolled right into Howie Winter's office at Marshall Motors and asked to forgive and forget. Howie said okay, but in reality, he thought Spike walked in there to kill him. He didn't trust Spike and he made the call that he had to go. So in 1974, the Hill took him out as well. That's how feared and dangerous the Charlestown crew was. Not one of them could be left alive. Out of all these feared and dangerous men, Stevie Hughes stood out. While he was still lurking throughout the shadows of the Boston streets, none of his rivals had a moment's peace. I don't think there's been many criminals that have had the whole city on edge the way that Stevie Hughes did between 1965 and 66. Because of this, his legend lives on almost 60 years later. I hope you guys enjoyed this quick video. I'm on a rain closure right now from digging clams, so I wanted to put out a quick video for you guys. You don't have to wait a whole week for one. Spent the whole day the other day working on a video on one of these rain days for you guys, but it didn't pass YouTube's ad guidelines. I did it about the topic I usually don't talk about. I'm not even sure what I said exactly to trigger their ad guidelines to not pass it, so I'm not even going to talk about it. But I put this video together real quick for you guys so you guys had something to watch since that video got kind of shot down by YouTube. Hopefully I'll have another video for you guys Sunday and Monday. I'm working on some good stories right now. I just need to talk to some people that were involved before I make the videos on it. If you guys like this video, of course, smash that like button, subscribe if you're not subscribed yet. I also just realized too that some people are having trouble reaching me by email. I have a Facebook account I didn't realize, so you guys can, it's just under my name, Jason Trimmins, and it has the profile picture of Jimmy the Bear Fleming. So if you guys have any video ideas or you want to contact me outside of the chat, outside of the comments, you can hit me up through there since people are having a hard time reaching me via email. But you guys know, most importantly, make good choices, make good decisions, take good care of yourselves, your family, your friends, your fellow human beings. Try to have a nice day. I'll talk to you guys soon. God bless.